current updates on some new herbicides that are coming out this year. Also, some new herbicides that are in development that hopefully will hit the industry in the next quarter or two. Hopefully, 2021 will have some new products for weed control in clover and legumes. So that looks very promising for us. We do have some new cases of resistant weeds to herbicides like 2,4-D and possibly some of the dinitroanilins like Prowl H2O that I'll discuss as well. And then planning ryegrass control programs for hay fields. I think that's on the minds of many growers right now as we start to cool off and see some winter annual weeds begin to establish in our pastures. So to start off, the first new herbicide I'm going to talk about, we do have a new active ingredient for pastures and hay fields called indaziflam. This is a pre-emergent herbicide, so it's going to be a preventative product that will inhibit the establishment of annual grasses. The trade name is going to be Resilon. And for those of you who worked in other crops, you may know the herbicide Allion. In turfgrass, it's sold as the trade name Spectacle. But this is going to be the pasture and hayfield product for pre-emergent control of weeds like crabgrass, goosegrass, crowfoot grass, and for winter weeds, ryegrass is also going to be one of the weeds that we can target with this pre-emergent herbicide. What is unique about indaziflam for us? It will be one of two pre-emergent herbicides labeled for permanent grass pastures, but it brings a new mode of action to the table for us in pastures and hay fields. It is different than Prowl H2O, so that is going to be a nice tool in the toolbox for managing resistant weeds. Prowl H2O has been labeled for pastures and hay fields now for about 10 years. And we are starting to see some resistance issues developing with weeds that are suspected to have resistance problems like crab and goosegrass in hayfields especially, where Prowl has been used every year for the last decade or so. So having a second pre-emergent herbicide to rotate with Prowl will certainly help us delay resistance development in annual grassy weeds to these pre-emergent herbicides. This is going to be a warm season grass product only. So Bermuda grass, bahia grass will be on the label. Fescue just has inconsistent tolerance levels. Ryegrass is also going to be injured from this herbicide. So we're going to keep it only on warm season grasses until that label changes. We've been working with Resilon for about the last 3 to 4 years in pastures, specifically looking at pasture grass tolerance. Also, we've been evaluating the efficacy for problem weed control. A little bit about the active ingredient indaziflam there. As you can see, it has very low use rates. And pounds on the ground is certainly an issue for the EPA when they take a look at new active ingredients coming out for the industry. Compared to some of the other pre-emergent herbicides that we use in lawns here. For this example, you can see we are dealing with pounds of active ingredient per acre for most commonly used pre-emergent herbicides, but with indaziflam, we are dealing with ounces of product per acre. So very low use rates with the indaziflam herbicide. However, it has very significant residual activity at labeled use rates. Here is Resilon applied as a pre-emergence treatment in a coastal Bermuda grass hayfield. The application was March 3rd, 2017, and that photo was taken July 11th. So very good pre-emergent control of crabgrass in that trial. It was on par with Prowl H2O until midsummer. However, we found that Prowl H2O started to break for us in July and August, and we saw very good control with the Resilon going into August and September. So it was holding longer than the standard Prowl H2O treatments at labeled use rates. Here's a look at the carryover Again, this is a pre-emergent herbicide that does have significant residual activity. That's a good thing. If you're a hayfield grower, you are trying to stay as weed-free as possible. This is a look at Resilon applied again March 3rd, and this picture was taken in January 10th. And all that green in that picture is seedling ryegrass, and we're still seeing residual effects of that treatment that was applied about 10 months before this picture was taken. So that's a good thing. Obviously, if you are concerned about ryegrass and the ryegrass interference with the transition of pasture grasses. However, if this is a grazed pasture and you depend on that ryegrass for winter grazing, that can be a big concern. So that's something to consider when using Resilon. Is what is the long-term goal of that pasture? Do you have plans for the fall? And using Resilon may not be a good fit if you depend on that ryegrass for winter grazing. We have looked at pasture grass tolerance, Bermuda grass and bahia grass, and this is work that was primarily done by Dr. Tim Gray down in Tifton. They looked at various rates of Resilon on the visual quality, growth. They also took yields, clippings, where they then weighed the grass from those plots that they harvested. And basically what they found here was there was no impact on Bermuda grass yield when they used labeled rates of Resilon. They went up to, I think, a 4x rate from what is on that product label, and saw no growth inhibition that resulted in yield reductions from the non-treated plots. The non-treated plots here were weed-free, so it was all pretty much equal in terms of Bermuda grass quality in those plots that they were using for this work. They also saw very little to no injury on bahia grass, so we feel pretty comfortable with the tolerance of labeled use rates of Resilon on those two species in Georgia. Here's a look at some work that we did this year, looking at pre-emergent sandburg control. This is in a mixed pasture of Bermuda grass with a little bit of broom sedge and other grasses, but pretty heavy infestation of the sandburg by mid to late summertime. Resilon at 3.5 to 5 ounces per acre gave us good control of sandburg. This is 20 weeks after initial treatments. And it was on par with Prowl H2O applied twice. There was a benefit, however, when we applied Resilon twice at 3.5 ounces per acre, getting up to 7 ounces per acre total. We made a split application after 8 weeks, and that bumped control better than the single applications of the 3.5 and 5 ounces per acre rates of the product. So good control of problem weeds like sandburg. It was no different than Prowl H2O, but again, when we're thinking about herbicide rotation, this is a different mode of action and something else to bring into the mix for weed control programs. We are seeing some interesting activity with Resilon on established broadleaf weeds. In particular, buckhorn plantain appears to be susceptible to injury from this pre-emergent herbicide. So established plantain is responding to Resilon applications, and it's not strong enough to be a standalone herbicide for post-emergent plantain control, but is bringing additive effects when we tank mix it with Roundup, Milestone, and other post-emergent herbicides. So you get an added benefit of enhanced post-emergent control of perennial broadleaf weeds like plantain in your fields. This is something that we did some work on in the greenhouse just to quantify the effects of Resilon on plantain growth, and we certainly did see growth responses in plantain growing in greenhouse pots. This is something to consider because we are seeing 2,4-D resistance in pastures and hayfields in Georgia with buckhorn plantain specifically, where you apply 2,4-D like you see in this picture, and we see segregation of that population where there's biotypes that respond to the 2,4-D, and then it's growing within plants that are not affected by those treatments with upright growth and basically healthy plants mixed in with those plants that are being killed out. 2,4-D resistance, this is something that we are seeing mostly in North Georgia in cool season grass country. Tall fescue, ryegrass, orchard grass pastures that have been using 2,4-D and other synthetic auxins for years are getting problems with plantain that cannot be controlled by 2,4-D. This is a concern for us with fescue, ryegrass, and also bahia grass because we don't have a lot of other herbicides to rotate different modes of action that are safe in those grass species. We can rotate away from 2,4-D with products like metsulfuron and Cimarron products, some of the ALS inhibitor chemistries in Bermuda grass. But bringing something like Resilon in, it's at least a new tool for controlling plantain in bahia grass pastures. If you do have a concern over 2,4-D resistance or some of the other broadleaf weeds that are not being controlled by 2,4-D, we can use products like Chaparral, which is a milestone metsulfuron combination product in late winter, early spring in cool season grasses like fescue and ryegrass that are well established. The metsulfuron is concerning there for warm temperatures, but in the wintertime, we can use that on established cool season grasses and bring a different mode of action to the table to control plantain that may be resistant to post-emergent treatments of 2,4-D and some of the other synthetic auxin chemistries. Here's another look at plantain control. This is a picture taken by Dr. Tim Gray. He was cleaning up some rows between pecans here, and the non-treated on the left compared to the strip there where he sprayed 2,4-D with Resilon in the mix. Very good control of a very dense plantain population there, you can see. So, putting those two together makes a lot of sense for not only the plantain control, but also grassy weeds and other weeds that are present in that field. One of the questions we have is about knotroot foxtail. This is a very problematic weed that can rapidly infest and take over pastures and hay fields. We know that prowl is not effective on knotroot foxtail that has overwintered. Knotroot foxtail basically is establishing from below ground rhizomes. It is overwintering, and it will reemerge from dormant vegetative plant material that stays dormant in the soil in the wintertime. Prowl is going to be most effective on plants that establish from seed because it is a true pre-emergent herbicide. We can get post-emergent control in Bermuda grass pastures with combinations of Pastora with Roundup. This is generally going to give us partial control and growth suppression. It will prevent knotroot foxtail from taking over pastures. It will slow down the spread of these patches, but really early detection is critical with knotroot foxtail. So patches like you see there in that picture, before that plant starts to spread from below ground rhizomes, kill it out before it begins to spread. It's going to be very critical. So constantly monitoring for knotroot foxtail and killing out young patches as soon as you see them is going to be critical. In terms of Resilon, the new pre-emergent herbicide, we have done some work with knotroot foxtail, and this is a look at the knotroot foxtail infestations after 1 year, where we did this trial starting in the fall. We sprayed herbicides like Roundup, Roundup with Resilon, Pastora with Resilon, etc. The non-treated plots here in this chart are the red bar. And you can see here all the other bars are much bigger than the non-treated, which tells us that we actually release knotroot foxtail with pre-emergent herbicides that are applied with post-emergent herbicides especially. Basically what we're seeing here is that pre-emergent herbicides are controlling other weeds. They're controlling summer annuals like crabgrass and annual foxtails, and it's releasing weeds like knotroot foxtail. So that's a concern. But for the question with Resilon, does it control knotroot foxtail? We do not have data to support recommending it for pre-emergent knotroot foxtail control, especially perennial infestations that are going to emerge from below ground rhizomes. And here's just a look at some of the rhizomes from knotroot foxtail. This is what is overwintering, and this is what will regenerate new plant tissue in the springtime. Again, pre-emergent herbicides like Pastora, like Resilon, they are going to primarily control weeds that emerge from seed in the spring or in the fall. These plants that overwinter are just growing right through pre-emergent herbicides that are present in the soil. So ways that we can extend the length of annual weed control, weeds like crabgrass, crowfoot grass, ryegrass in the fall, apply split applications of these herbicides. For hayfield specifically, Prowl H2O. If you have a problem with crabgrass, if you have a problem with other annual grasses, annual foxtails, 2 applications to get to that 4.2 quarts per acre is going to be critical to get season-long control. Start these programs in late February, about 2.1 quarts per acre. Make that second application after your first cutting. For a grazed pasture, you can go back in after about 6 to 8 weeks, and that will just help extend residual control of those annual plants for late summer into the fall. Resilon, we need to be at about 7 ounces per acre total. 5 ounces per acre can also work with a single application. However, that's the highest labeled use rate with one treatment is going to be 5 ounces per acre. But we can do split applications of 3.5 ounces per acre twice. Again, late February with a second application after your first cutting, or about 8 weeks after the first treatment. And that is shown to provide very good long-term residual control of annual weeds. That can extend into ryegrass germination into the fall as well. Some of the other weeds that are problematic for us include Johnson grass. We do have a new case, which I believe may be the first report of herbicide resistance with Johnson grass in Bermuda grass. This is coming from the state of Alabama, where they've been spraying Outrider in roadsides up against pastures with Outrider for years. And they have confirmed Johnson grass populations that are no longer controlled by sulfosulfuron, Pastora, and some of the other ALS inhibiting herbicides. This is concerning because we really don't have a lot of other selective options for managing Johnson grass in bahia grass or Bermuda grass pastures. Outrider's been the Cadillac product for years. And when we lose that mode of action, we really don't have a lot of other options to bring into the mix. So spot treating Roundup, coming in with a wick bar, especially for Johnson grass plants that are this tall, wicking glyphosate on it. That would be a very good strategy, especially in the fall. We are getting a little bit late into the year for spraying out Johnson grass, but if you have these plants that are actively growing, that are at this size, this will be a good time of year to get it killed out so that we can kill the below ground rhizomes, and hopefully those plants will not reemerge in the spring of next year. But for spraying out Johnson grass, we can use Outrider. Hopefully it is susceptible still in your pastures. Spraying it when Johnson grass is at about 12 to 18 inches in height is the best size of Johnson grass to spray. You don't want to spray it too early when the plant is still re-emerging in the springtime, but give it some time, let it get some growth on it. Using Outrider with a good quality surfactant to promote the stick and the spray retention of that Outrider onto the plant will help enhance control. Spring applications can be effective for suppressing Johnson grass, but fall is the best time of year for long-term kill. So September into October, that's usually when we get the best long-term control of Johnson grass with herbicides like Outrider, Roundup, and other herbicides that translocate to rhizomes of the plant. Ryegrass is also one weed of hay fields where we're getting lots of herbicide resistance throughout the state. This is not just a problem of pastures and hay fields, it's a problem in roadsides and other cropping systems. Ryegrass obviously can be very competitive with warm season grasses that are transitioning from winter dormancy to spring and summer growth. So getting ryegrass killed out can be very critical to limit the competition of that weed for the grasses as they green up in the spring. We are getting lots of glyphosate resistance reports where growers have been using Roundup exclusively for years. Also sulfonylureas like Pastora, like metsulfuron or Cimarron. We are also seeing ALS resistant ryegrass as well. Here's what the resistance looks like. This is just a similar herbicide to Pastora and to metsulfuron. Basically no response there from the resistant biotype in the background of that picture to a dose response of that herbicide that was sprayed at about a 20x rate. This is concerning for us. Obviously, ryegrass is a major problematic weed in hay fields. Most of the selective herbicides that we are using for ryegrass control on green Bermuda grass, especially in the spring, these are all from the same herbicide mode of action. They're all from the same family, and they all work the same way. So if we have resistance to one of these herbicides, the group 2 herbicides, more than likely that ryegrass will be resistant to all of them. So what we are seeing the most consistent control with, if we have Pastora resistance or ryegrass with resistance to group 2 herbicides, sulfonylureas, coming in with a tank mixture of Pastora with Roundup in January or February, once the ryegrass is actively growing and starting to exhibit some shoot growth, that's when we're spraying it out. We're getting very good selectivity. Going too late in the winter or springtime when we have warm temperatures can delay Bermuda grass green up, but coming in with Roundup, keeping that rate at about 8 ounces per acre to 10 ounces per acre with a product like Roundup Pro, you can get very good selective control with Pastora to get that ryegrass removed from those fields so it's not competing with that Bermuda grass during spring transition. Okay, a few new herbicides as well coming out from the Corteva company. Corteva used to be Dow AgroSciences. Dow Agro had a huge, still does have a big portfolio in the pasture and hayfield weed control market. They have 2 herbicides that are, one is on the market, the other one is coming out hopefully next year. Duracor is a new combination product that is going to be labeled for permanent grasses, pastures, and hayfields. Duracor is going to replace Grazon next, and Grazon P plus D. They're going to phase out the Grazon products and replace it with Duracor. And it still has the milestone component, aminopyrrolid, but it's got a new active ingredient called fluropyroxafen. And that is also a broadleaf herbicide, but it will also pick up sedges and certain grassy weeds too. So it's a little bit more broad spectrum, certainly than what 2,4-D was bringing to the table in a Grazon Next product. But that is going to be a good combination for controlling many perennial broadleaf weeds, some of the brush species, and Duracor I think is going to probably be more stable than Grazon Next because of the 2,4-D component has been replaced out of that product. So Duracor should be stable to use in pastures that maybe border crops like cotton and some of the potentially sensitive crops that are growing next to some of the grasses grown for pastures and hayfields in the summertime when we're concerned about 2,4-D drift. Proclova is a new broadleaf herbicide as well that is still being researched in field trials. Proclova Also has the new active ingredient in it, which is generally safe on many legumes. Clover, Lespedeza will be labeled as tolerant species for this product. It will be combined with 2,4-D, low rates of 2,4-D, and they will be targeting broadleaf weeds with Proclova. So a new tool in the toolbox to manage broadleaf weeds in legumes, which is something that we've been needing for quite some time. Here's a look at some of the Proclova plots. This was research conducted by Dr. Nick Basinger on the Athens campus at UGA. And this was just a weedy pasture that they did some basic work with Proclova there. It's labeled as PC on this picture. This is 2 weeks after treatments, comparing it to 2,4-D. And here's a look at the plots 1 month after treatments here. You can see the Proclova plots is pretty clean and on par with 2,4-D by itself. There is some grassy weeds coming back there, so this is probably not going to pick up weeds like crabgrass and certain other annual grassy species. Could potentially release those species, but we've got plenty of good post-emergent herbicides to use for cleaning up grassy weeds in clover, Lespedeza, and legume crops. So this is a product that we are still working with. Hopefully we'll be able to do some more research with the selectivity of Proclova. It will injure or discolor clover for several weeks after applications. You can get some stunted growth and some off coloring, but you can see here with the level of weed control, you're basically controlling out the broadleaf weeds that do not recover as the clover and the legumes bounce back with good growing conditions. They will respond after about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and recover from the Proclova application. Visit GeorgiaPastureWeeds.com for all things weed control in pastures and hay fields. There is a weed identification database like Haley has on her website for the county. We also have the pest control recommendations on this website as well if you would like a quick access to looking up certain herbicides, rates, grazing restrictions, cutting restrictions. Those are all there for products labeled for pastures and hay fields on GeorgiaPastureWeeds.com. And with that, I will wrap it up. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to take them at this time.
If you do have a question, just make sure that you unmute yourself, because I think I've muted everybody. Or if you want to throw something in the chat box too, we'll watch that.
I'm sorry, what was that last website that you had up there? The pasture, Georgia Pasture and Weeds.com. Okay. Thank you.
This is Kenny Trussell. I've got a question.
Sure.
Dr. McCullough, you put a slide up where you showed the dosage rates for Prowl H2O and the new Resolon, but you're not saying use both of those in the same year, are you? You're just saying that was just the dosage to use for which one you choose to use, right?
You can use them in the same year, just don't use them together. I think that would be excessive. You could certainly follow one with the other, though. So, you know, starting out with Prowl H2O, late winter time, come back after your first cutting with Resolon. I think that would be fine. I don't see any problem with that.
Okay. One other question.
It's certainly good to consider herbicide rotation. You can do that in season, or you can do 1 year after the other, you know, Prowl to Resolon in the following year.
Okay. Follow-on question that goes along with that one. I've been doing hay for about 4 or 5 years now, and I've got this past year I didn't use any herbicides at all. I had pretty much weed-free, pretty amazing. But previous years I had used Rometsol for the double doses, and use Prowl in the spring and a second dose, and then use Rometsol I was just curious, just as far as the need to rotate or whatever. I certainly don't see any resistance yet to the Remetsol, but or Prowl. But should I go ahead and throw in these other products instead of continuing, or just wondering when to start the rotation and all?
So if you spray Prowl one time per year for 10 years straight, you would probably shift that property to biotypes of crabgrass or whatever annual weeds you're trying to control. You would probably shift them to resistant biotypes that are starting to spread and grow in numbers in that population. So if you spray Prowl more than one time per year, you'll accelerate that process. So the more and more you spray the same herbicide, the quicker you are shifting that weed population to biotypes that are going to favor survival through resistance of that weed species. So I would recommend, you don't have resistance, but you don't have resistance yet.
Right.
It's just a matter of time. If you keep doing the same thing over and over, we know how this is going to end. So be proactive, plan product rotation, and if it's possible, bring something like Resilon into the mix. You may want to bring in some other post-emergent herbicides to replace the, metsulfuron?
Yeah.
And that would be one way to delay the onset of resistance to, say, Prowl H2O, because Prowl is still a good product, but you want to maintain that field so that you can continue to use it down the road too. There are pastures where growers just simply cannot use Roundup anymore for controlling weeds like ryegrass, for example. They've used it exclusively for 10 years plus, and those weeds no longer respond to Roundup. So it's basically off the table. So you don't want to end up with the loss of a tool like Prowl. So rotating Resilon in every other year, or maybe take 2 years off, use the Resilon, then bring Prowl back in for 2 years. That's just going to help delay the onset of resistance and hopefully improve the sustainability of the pasture.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Patrick, it's Don Day.
Hi, Don. How are you?
Yes, sir. I'm doing fine. You had a great presentation there.
Appreciate that.
Yes, sir. I'm kind of interested in this Duacor. I've been using, the Grazon, Next, and so forth, and Remedy on my farm here. I've got most of the weeds cleaned up pretty good, but I've got a situation with horse nettle, what I call bull nettle. I grew up calling it bull nettle, boy, instead of pain. But it seemed like I'm just going to see what your suggestion is on the time of year to spray. I got a few pastures that, I've controlled it, but I got some of it that keeps coming back. I take it out but I understand that spraying it at full bloom later in the fall, I may have been hitting it too early, getting excited about getting rid of it.
Yeah.
But it's an indeterminate plant, and it starts blooming and putting on fruit early on. If you know what I mean. If you wait too long, you're gonna have some seed to go for next year. You see my predicament there.
Right.
But when's the best time to spray horse nettle?
I think the best time of year to enhance the management of the pasture would be late spring, early summer. However, the efficacy will be better in the fall.
Yeah.
Late summer, fall. So it's, you got to pick your battles here. Do you want to have it spreading all summer long and wait for it? So, what I would do there, Don, is maybe consider a late spring application, get that population in check so you can release desirable grasses in the summer, and then just pencil in a fall application for any regrowth that may occur in, say, September. and that will hopefully take out some of those heavy infestations that are regrowing on you in that field. But, I think the herbicide selection is going to be critical there. You use the Grazon Next. That's certainly a good chemistry. The Grazon P+D would also be good. And there are some other products like Surmount that you may also want to take a look at there for controlling the nettles.
Okay. You think the Duacor will be better?
I think it should be on par with Grazon Next. I have not looked at it on horse nettle, but from what they are positioning this product, they are going to transition Grazon Next out for Duacor. So it should be on par with Grazon Next with weeds like horse nettle. But we're still learning about it. They didn't have a lot of time to get the product in our hands before it was launched. So we're still kind of learning about how it compares with products like Grazon Next, but I anticipate it to be just as good, if not better.
Yeah, what I like to do is I cut my pastures over for hay, normally in early May. You don't have any problem, before or up to early May with it. It's just, I cut my hay and then come back and graze the rest of the year. And then after the soil warms up is when horse nettle comes on back and so forth. So, well, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome, Don. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, sir. I enjoyed it.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I tell you, I'm sorry, just one other thing about these resistant weeds. You really have to be careful. It don't take long. It's terrible, isn't it? You get something at work, but it won't stick around.
That's right. Just having a basic awareness of how herbicide resistance can develop is just so critical, just so we don't lose herbicides like 2,4-D. It's hard to beat the price and return on investment with 2,4-D, but if it's no longer effective, then you will have to go to more expensive options. So delaying the onset of resistance by rotating products, rotating modes of action can be very critical.
Very good.
I would like an opinion
Okay.
on a lot of the fertilizer spreaders will mix your herbicide in with the fertilizer.
Right.
Is that a good, bad, or just no comment type plan? I don't know. I've never done it. I just wondered what you thought of that.
Well, I think it's a good way to kill two birds with one stone. So you just go out with one application to fertilize and put out a herbicide like Milestone, for example. And that would be one way to get a herbicide that's absorbed by the roots. It's got good soil activity that would also have pre-emergent activity on broadleaf weeds out with the fertilizer. The limitation there is efficacy of post-emergent herbicides. We generally get better weed control when we spray herbicides like Milestone so that it can be taken up through the shoots. When you spread it on a fertilizer carrier, you kind of will eliminate the potential for foliar uptake of that herbicide. It's going to be primarily absorbed by the roots. So that is one limitation there, and you may lose some efficacy because it's going to be dependent on how much root uptake from the weeds will occur.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but you can also get Prowl H2O, pre-emergent herbicides mixed in with fertilizer, kind of a weed and feed approach. And that's also a very good way to get pre-emergent herbicides that need to be in the soil out with the fertilizer application too. So that would be probably a better fit than a post-emergent herbicide that will depend on being taken up by the foliar part of the shoots of the plant.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Don't forget, I muted everybody. So if you're trying to ask a question, make sure you unmute yourself.
I've got one more. Kenny Trussell here. In my field, which is Tift 85 Bermuda, I had it sprigged about 5 years ago. I've got some pretty big spots of common Bermuda. And I actually was in communication with Dennis Hancock a few years ago, and kind of the advice then was pretty much just keep working on it with Roundup, spot spraying, and keep the pH on the high side, which he said favored the would help or kind of hurt the common a little bit more than it would the or give the Tift 85 a little advantage. I just thought I'd ask, is there any other advice on it other than that?
No, I think that's where site preparation, Kenny, is so critical before you sprig. What was your renovation program before you sprig?
Interestingly, it was, I think, extremely good. I had sprayed Roundup several times over the course of a year before I sprigged it. I think, honestly, that I may have got some contaminated sprigs, if that makes sense. I just feel like that I know that the guy that sprigged it did an excellent job, but at one point he thought he didn't have any sprigs, and then he said he did. So I'm just, honestly just wondering if perhaps I got sprigs from a field that wasn't in the best shape. But I don't know that I shouldn't really say that. But I was surprised that I had any problems because I thought done a great job of prep, but then I'm very much a rookie at all this, so who knows?
Well, if you've got unlimited time, which nobody does, but it would be ideal to kill out that field for a 2-year period before you plant again, especially if you're killing out Bermuda grass and you're going to plant new Bermuda grass. If you can sit on it for 2 years and spray it out, start those programs in the fall, and just continue to spray it with within the legal labeled limits of glyphosate applications per year. And you can do it for 2 years, till it up and come in with the second year, spray again. That will help you get as clean as possible before you bring that new Bermuda grass into the field. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of growers make is they will start renovating in the springtime so they can plant in the summer. And that is setting up for failure.
I did start in the fall.
Fall is
even
the best time
summer
of year.
Fall
is the best time of year to kill existing Bermuda grass out. If anybody's thinking about renovating and you're going to start in the springtime, I would tell you to wait until September and reestablish the following year, the following growing season. Spraying out Bermuda grass in the springtime, everything's working against you. You just cannot get the entire plant killed out that time of year. So that's where we get a lot of contamination problems, is when folks start the renovation process at the wrong time of year.
Do you think that the Tift 85 will win out in the long run, or do I really need to be diligent with trying to kill the common with spot spraying?
I would continue to spot spray. It sounds like you're on top of it, so you're already ahead of the game. Just don't let that common continue to spread, because that's a battle you don't want to be fighting, forever. So kill out those patches and prevent them from spreading as soon as possible. And
that's a lot of work. I was hoping you were going to say Tift 85 will eventually take it. If it takes 3 or 4 more years, I don't really care as long as it's winning. But
well, it might, especially if you're spot spraying Roundup. But I just don't want to make any guarantees that I can't I can't back up. I don't want to get your hopes up too high. But
I understand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I want to say thank you, Patrick. I mean, I think they really enjoyed it. I went ahead and recorded. I'm going to stop recording now.